And we are live. Welcome to the third episode of the Razorburn podcast. I'm once again joined by Heather, the co-host, and I'm joined by a very great guest today. Introduce yourself, Mr. Will.
I'm Will, and I'm drinking a Coke.
Okay, that's a good. Well, how would I describe that? That's a fantastic contribution at the start. That's a.
It's a status update. It's the social media generation.
It is, yeah. Oh man, you could everything you say, I could put like the Twitter bird and quote it. Do you know when people kind of talk and they put the Twitter bird in terms of quotes, specifically with Donald Trump?
I was
Oh,
actually thinking that was what they used to do for homes of the rich and famous, but I guess that's what a Twitter bird is now. We don't have MTV Cribs anymore. Now we have
that's
Twitter
We do
shots.
have Twitter
that's
shots.
true.
So,
Yeah.
um, let's get a bit into your background, Will. So, if anyone that is watching this doesn't know you, they will know you a bit more after this background. So, what do you do?
I make shaving soap, and now I make perfume.
And
And I also make aftershave and made pomade for a little while, and don't make bar soap for regular sale. I don't know. Is there anything else that we make that I'm forgetting?
You make a bomb, right?
Yeah, that was a beta release, but we expect to be making a balm at some point in the future once my filling equipment gets here.
that'd be interesting.
Yeah, you know.
Okay. I believe Heather has some funny questions to ask you, so by all means.
Ooh,
I
these are my
do.
favorite.
They're just a few icebreaker questions. So, what is since you're like one of your big things is obviously in fragrance. What is your favorite scent? Not perfume, but your favorite scent. It could be like a natural scent, artificial, whatever.
Still think I'm gonna have to go with Zing. Actually, like I love the circus for a lot of reasons, and like one of the things that I really love about the circus is its sensory characteristics, and that includes its distinct and very complex aroma.
Okay. What is your most disliked scent?
Green Irish Tweed.
Yeah, I don't like green Irish tweed either, man. People love it. I don't. I just don't understand.
It's
Mm,
kind of overdone too,
Yeah.
mm.
especially like in like skincare products, I think. A very important question, chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate. Wait, back up. What kind of chocolate?
Mm, let's say it's an ice cream.
Chocolate. Wait, well, like there's a place in Cambridge, Massachusetts called Tuscanini's that makes the absolute best vanilla ice cream I've ever had. It's like the second coming of ice cream Jesus. So, and I'm not normally a vanilla ice cream person. Like I love ice cream, but I'm not normally a vanilla ice cream person. But like this is pretty serious vanilla ice cream. So I guess my answer is it depends, but generally chocolate.
Generally chocolate. I'll go for that. Jenny's chocolate is the best like store-bought ice cream, by the
Okay.
way.
That's
Best
not
chocolate.
available here because
Best
we're
chocolate.
in, the middle of nowhere. But
Okay, and then last question. What is your favorite alcoholic beverage?
scotch.
Good choice, man.
Scotch. Oh,
Good choice.
I can't do scotch.
Really? Why?
They always smell good, but they smell good, but I just can't do the flavor. They always have such this bite, and I can't
Is
do
it the
it.
That's
peat?
fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
love that
like
about
it
Scotch, man.
And
burns.
for me, the peatier the better. Like
Yeah.
I love Ardbeg and Lafroig and like really smoky, very
Yeah.
Yeah.
strong
Me
scotches.
Some
too.
of them smell really, really good, and then
Mm.
others but they never taste as good as they smell to me. But no, anyway,
I will say Doers, not my thing. Not my
yeah,
thing at
no,
all.
that's like rubbing alcohol with a dash of oat, like a dash of oat or something. It's gross. I can't
Tell
do
us
it.
how you really feel, Heather. I'm a little
Yeah,
unclear.
yeah, I'm pretty good at
Oh, okay.
that. So, one of the things that we wanted to kind of start into was talking a little bit about Barrister and Mann, and we know you've been asked a lot of questions, and you've done AMAs and interviews and everything regarding that. So we kind of wanted to do a little bit of a different approach on that. So one of the things that instead of getting into the background, because I think unless you want to do a real quick background, I think a lot of people are familiar with people who are watching this are probably familiar with you.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably. So one of the big questions that I wanted to ask, as an artisan, whenever I first got into like the hobby scene, you're definitely someone that is a great influence over the community. And I think that the majority of customers and wet shavers in this hobby feel the same way. So, I've heard over and over, you kind of lead the way and you have transformed the community. So, how do you feel that you've had the biggest impact, like the biggest change on the community?
When I first got into wet shaving, fragrance was limited. At least the crossover between fragrance and grooming. I mean, like there were the big British houses, D.R. Harris, Jeff Trumper, Taylor Vauban, Straight Truffin and Hill, and they did kind of their own independent perfumery thing, which was connected to their history. I mean, like they made fragrances for the House of Lords and for various different nobles and whomever. So that made a lot of sense for them. But really, in terms of American fragrance, the only people who were really doing a whole lot were Queen Charlotte soaps, who are now gone. But at the time, they were doing some kind of interesting stuff. But I guess there's always been Mama Bear. Like as long as there's been wet shaving in the United States, there's been Mama Bear. But most and I there's Ginger's Garden. But in terms of like really dragging new and original composition out into the light, no one except Queen Charlotte was really doing very much. And I decided that it would be cool to do our own thing. And it turned out that it worked really well. And so, like, a lot of people were like, well, we should do our own things too. And so, in that respect, I guess, like, it's impossible to know what would have happened had we never gotten started. But it seems to me, at least, that the sort of explosion in independent scent creation in the shaving world was a direct result of the fact that we had a fair amount of success with it. And a bunch of other people were like, well, okay, so they've proven the concept, and now we are sort of free to maybe experiment a little bit more. Because it's scary, right? To just like put something out there and be like, hey, this is something that no one else has ever made before. Hope you like it, and if you don't, please don't send me death threats.
It's actually kind of funny because I'd like to know your customer base's, I guess, first impressions of the first scents you released. I don't even know what they are. What are they?
The original scents were, the very first scent was lime, lavender, and cedarwood. Like that was the testing scent. That was before I figured out how to make lime not smell like floor cleaner. And that's, I mean, lime is just, it's a pain in the ass. But anyway, so the original scents were lime, lavender, and cedarwood, Seville, winter spice, which was technically only available for sale for 3 days.
Wow.
And then we did it the next year, and I think we did it 1 year after that, and there were allergen problems, and we stopped making it. Vetiver Heather Clary Sage, which is gone now. Cheshire was a somewhat later edition, so we launched in March, and then we released Cheshire in May. Excuse me. Bay Rum.
I remember Bay Rum.
Unscented.
I love Bay Rum.
And honestly, that might be
And like when you first started releasing soaps, what was the initial kind of impression of the people that were trying them?
Regarding the fragrance or regarding the performance?
Mainly the fragrance.
A lot of people thought it was kind of weird. I mean, like, Seville was a big hit right out of the gate and is still our bestseller, 7 years later. Winter Spice was very sweet, and as I said, there were allergen problems with it. There were a lot of people who liked it, but a lot of people who couldn't shave with it.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, but, almond, cinnamon,
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's just a recipe for skin problems.
Merchant 7X.
Which, It's just kind of par for
Yeah.
or not par for the course. It's part of the risk of doing
It
this.
is.
And then we did Ferox, which the shaving world seemed to think was like a really new idea because it was grapefruit and herbs, and I mean, like, perfumery has had citrus and herbs
Yeah.
basically since the beginning. I mean, like that was Farina's original design. So people thought it was kind of strange. And there were some that did well and some that didn't do well. And, everybody sort of settled into their niche. And when we first debuted Cheshire, at the time, there were no other Earl Grey scents, or no realistic Earl Grey scents on the market. So that was sort of a thing.
It's funny you say that, actually, because I would still say Cheshire's the best Earl Grey scent. Just judging by what Earl Grey actually smells like. It's outstanding.
Right.
It's my favorite Barrister and Mann scent as well. It's really, really nice.
It's my favorite of the classic line. And like, I literally stood there with a bag of Bigelow and a dropper full of bergamot oil and like tested it until I got it absolutely right. But yeah, I mean, that was the initial reaction, I think, was somewhat mixed. There were some of the stranger scents, most of which are now discontinued. People were like, there were a few people who really dug them, and then there were people who were like, what is this?
Why do you think that is?
And then fragrance is hard, and you're challenging 100 years of marketing.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, like, that's hard. A social change like that, a fundamental shift from one to the other, like, this is masculine versus this is not, that's a really hard thing to challenge. Like, that's something that I could see Edward Bernays, like, being hired to do. Like, this is the man who was hired to make bacon a breakfast food in the United States. It was not a breakfast food before then. And that was only 80 years ago.
He did a good job.
He did do a good job. And he did such a good job that if you say that to people, they go, what do you mean it's not a breakfast food? Like, you literally can't even imagine that concept.
He must have invented the keto diet.
Yeah. I mean, he invented public relations. Like, literally, he is the father of public relations. So he made messaging what it is. And he made marketing, in many respects, what it is. And so he was, very, very successful. The meatpacking industry hired him to make bacon a breakfast food. I don't actually know why they did that, but they decided that it needed to be like part of the American diet in a very big way. And so they hired him to do this. And but that's getting away from the point. The point is that florals are sort of a hard thing in the United States. And we're sort of getting away from that at this point, but you show off, say, a jasmine scent, and that's a really, really difficult line to walk, and it's one that you have to walk very closely. And like, I've done a few jasmine scents that haven't worked out. Like, people didn't like Sinfonia. Some people felt it was too feminine, and I understand that. I didn't think so. But, it's a matter of marketing. It's a matter of social construct. It's the idea that flowers are for women, citrus is for men, fresh scents are for men, violet is cheap, and like, none of those things is necessarily true. But that's what we have been told was the case. And so, like I said, you're fighting a century's worth of social construct. So.
Yeah. Don't you feel like, though, fragrance in general, like the trend is going a little bit more towards scents being more unisex, or at least some that are like not quite so like just dead on masculine and feminine? There's a little bit more of that kind of like coming together area.
It is now.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I don't believe in the idea of gendered fragrance. I never have. I have been known to tell the story that when I was in law school, I knew a guy who wore Chanel No. 5, and he smelled terrific.
Really? I've never seen
And, like,
a guy wear Chanel.
It's Chanel No. 5. I mean, the most famous women's perfume of all time. Marilyn Monroe, a drop of No. 5 and nothing else. Some of the greatest advertising copy ever written, and they didn't even write it. But we're getting to that point where, and that's partially a marketing thing, and it's partially the fact that as an art form, fragrance is becoming more of a matter of art that stands on its own as opposed to something that's meant for women or for men.
Mhm.
You know, it's not, it's, tobacco is one of the, you know, it's working because even if you do try to sell something to a specific demographic, like say I were to sell Rome, right? Something very strong and tobacco heavy and smoky and arguably masculine. Say I were to successfully sell that to women. And I'm not saying that would ever happen, but let's say that it would for the sake of argument. That blurs the line, right? That crosses the line. And so here you have something that's very traditionally masculine being offered to women, and women are wearing it and enjoying it. And so we're seeing that, not quite to that extent, but we're seeing that in mainstream fragrance. We're seeing things like Replica offering, you know, Jazz Club. And they're like, well, it's for men or for women. And a lot of women wear it, and a lot of women really like it. And it's, you know, tobacco is one of those things that's a classically masculine note, but it's crossing over. And so we're starting to see a blurring of the line and more of a matter of fragrance standing on its own as an art form and not necessarily being sold to one gender or the other.
Yeah, I like Jazz Club. I actually wear it.
Yeah. See?
So, but I may be a little bit of an oddball too, because working with men's scents, I tend to have to, you know, I have to be able to test them. So I probably walk around smelling like a man a lot of the days.
Yeah, but so long as you own it, what difference does it make?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, like I
yeah.
wear Cured for Sea all the time. You know, I own a bottle of it. I wear Bois d'Azil all the time. Both of those are as classically feminine scents as you can get. I mean, like they're part of the original catalog of Ernest Beau's Chanel perfumes, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So what matters is that you wear something and you enjoy it and it smells good on you. And to hell with who it's supposedly for.
Right. Yeah, I agree. As long as you're enjoying it, you know, but it's just like anything else. As long as you're enjoying it, who cares what other people think, really? Yeah.
Exactly.
So I definitely, as an artisan point of view, I definitely feel like, you know, you set the bar as far as fragrances and in doing that, and you are 100% correct. I'm working on learning perfuming, and it's hard. Like it is. It's not easy. And people say, well, they don't make their own scents. Well, obviously, those people have never tried to make their own scent.
Let me show you something. This is so when perfumers work, they generally work on something called an organ, right? And it's an organization of.
Are you going to show us your organ?
Yeah, well, after a fashion.
That sounded
Arguably,
really bad, but I want to see it.
my organ is, and nobody make any jokes, but my organ is in considerable disarray for the time being. There's no real rhyme or reason to it, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that there are all these different materials, and you have to know what they do. So this is the organ.
Wow.
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 How many do you have? How many notes and compounds do you have?
Oh God, I don't even know. I mean, like I have them organized according to olfactory use. So, like, I have a bucket of earthy character materials, and I have musks, and I have smoke and leather, and I have citrus, and I have floral, and I have fresh amber kind of stuff or marine stuff. I have fruity stuff. It's just a matter of organizing it all, but it's not nearly as organized as I'd like it to be. I wish I had like a searchable catalog, but space is a consideration, and I mean, part of the reason that it looks the way it does is that I ran out of space and had to put things on top of it. So
I started with 350, and I don't know what I was thinking because it was completely overwhelming. Like I literally sat down after I got everything set up the way I wanted to, and I was like, what the shit? Like, what was I thinking? I have no idea what to do with any of this.
And Jean-Claude Elena famously reduced his organ to, I think, 330 something materials, and that's considered like extraordinarily minimalistic. Most perfume organs that I have heard of are more in the order of, say, 700 to 800 materials. There are some perfumers who work with over 1,500. And then there are people like the poor perfumer who works for Aveda, who is forced to work with only natural materials and only if they're organic.
Oh.
And I can't remember his name. I believe he's Japanese, and God bless that man. He makes beautiful fragrances with an extremely limited palette.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It's definitely overwhelming. Yeah, I'm working on learning, but it's just, and when I get new ones in, I'm like trying to make sure that I'm going through. But I have mine, because I'm like a little bit type A. I have mine organized by scent. I have the scents together, but I also have them separated by base, mid, and top because it's part of my learning too. It's not like I can look at it and know what it is. I have to I'm still learning it. So I have mine like categorized like as much as I can, just so that I can like figure out how to use it.
Well, just remember that a single note is not necessarily a base, mid, or top note at any given time. Like lavender is arguably a top note. Unless it's lavender absolute, then it might be a base note. And if you blend the two, they might be a heart note.
It's a lot to learn.
Yeah, she hates me now. Don't worry.
So
no. It's incredible to do the research and to learn, and it's completely overwhelming. And what I tell everybody is it's like starting out with 300 spices and figuring out how to cook. Like it's like so much to try to remember like how to use it, when to use it, what quantities to use it in. Like it's a lot.
And then having potentially thousands of people taste your food, and they send you an email and say, well, this smells like shit.
It's funny actually because
and we're actually
so kind of going on to that. So Barrister and Mann has been around for a very long time. Well, very long time as far as the current wet shaving space goes. You're one of the long haulers that are around at the moment. Kind of based on that, growing to the company you are today, what growing pains have you gone through to get where you are? Because I work for Carve. We've had considerable growing pains.
Right.
I think every artisan or every maker, so to speak, has those growing pains.
Yeah.
This business does not scale well.
No, not at all.
Amen.
There is basically no economy of scale to what we do. And that's a real problem because trying to make, say, 700, 800, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 jars of a product as quickly as you possibly can and ship them all over the world is very difficult.
And consistently.
Excuse me. Yes, and consistently. And, when you work with the kind of things that I do, where you work with vanillin and it discolors part of the soap, and people send you an email and they're like, well, I don't think my soap is properly mixed. And it's like, trust me, it was all mixed in the same vat. It's perfectly fine. The top of it is reacting to the oxygen. And then they're like, well, why are there some parts of it that are discolored and some parts that aren't? And it took me a while to learn the answer to this. And it's that soap jars are not perfect heat sinks. And so the parts of the soap pull away at different times.
Yeah.
But back to your question. The scalability of this is a real problem. You can't buy 100,000 tons of something.
No.
Whereby, like Williams, everybody talk, well, Williams is cheap. And the reason Williams is cheap is that, A, it's crap.
It sucks. It's fucking awful. Yeah.
B,
tell us how you feel, Will.
I mean, like, I will say, vintage Williams was great soap. Modern Williams, you can get it to lather, sure. But is it really worth the deal that you have to make with the devil?
By all means, no.
Yeah. So, but the thing is, people are like, well, it's cheap, and the reason it's cheap is that the equipment was bought 100+ years ago. It's bought and paid for. It's been bought and paid for that entire time. They can buy, hundreds of thousands of tons of stearic acid and tallow or palm oil or whatever it is that they're using, and so they pay pennies for it. They can get a ton for like $50. Whereas for us, it's a very different thing. And the other thing is that they have equipment. It's really, really hard to get equipment to make shaving soap on a small scale where you can speed up the process. I have finally figured out how to do it, and that's part of the equipment that's coming. But and so I'm hoping to, maybe give by my hands and my soap maker's hands a little bit of rest, because I couldn't possibly make all the soap myself. But you need some way to speed up the process, and unfortunately there is that human factor.
Absolutely.
For years I filled the aftershave by hand with a funnel and a pitcher. It was horrible.
Yeah.
180 bottles of aftershave was a day's work. And I'd put them up and then they'd be gone in 2 or 3 days. Or if we were to launch, I'd have to do it 3 or 4 or 5 more times. And it's like, okay, well, what do we do now? So filling machines are much easier to come by than a way to keep soap hot and fill it at the same time, precisely. That's the really hard part.
Yep.
Aftershave is much easier. Soap is really hard because you have to keep it hot. And everyone's like, well, why can't you just mill it? It's like, okay, if you're milling it by hand, it's huge amounts of work. And I know HEV does it. I somewhat question how much of it they do. But they do some of it. But if you're doing, say you ship 25,000 jars of soap a year, okay, without equipment, you just can't mill soap. You can't mill that much soap by hand. Your body can't take it, for one thing.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine artisans. It's just not feasible for us. I mean, it really isn't, unless you do a significant investment. And then you also, have other, a lot of us are 1 and 2 people operations.
Yeah.
You just can't spend the time to do something like that.
Yeah. And the thing is that, like I said, there's that human factor. You can only fill a jar of soap so fast, and you can only do so many a day, because eventually you just can't stand there any longer. Your hands start to take a real beating. Eventually you can't feel your joints. And so it's more than anything, it's a timing factor. You can only fill so many jars a minute, say. And the labor cost is a real problem, and the lack of scalability is a real problem.
Yeah, I would say kind of predominantly over the last year, that's where Carve Shaving Co. has really struggled. There's a degree of getting personnel to do what you need them to do, but at the same time, it's doing it to a degree where a small business can warrant paying for those employees, because if productivity isn't where it needs to be, especially with, I get medium scale manufacturing is what we're doing for the most part. The difficult thing where we are as a company at the moment is we can produce the razors quite quick, we can make them quick, but the finishing of the razors in themselves, it's really intensive. We deburr the parts by hand, we bead blast the parts by hand. All of those processes, when you're thinking of each individual part, is a considerable amount of time. And I can imagine there are loads of parallels to soap making as well. And when you're that one guy in the shop or in the soap making area, it's difficult to say, I have to do only this and only this now, when I have these 50 other things to do. And I'd say that's where Carve has struggled the most within the last year.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, I think that's a problem that every small manufacturing business is going to run into, unless you have, say a few million in venture capital, and you can go to whomever
nice.
Yeah, right. But let me give you a perfect example. I went to Bradford Soap Company a couple of years ago and asked them if they could make soap for us. And this was an American manufacturer. I also went to Velabra. Velabra was a little bit more tractable, but there were still big problems. And now Velabra's been sold. And
when you say make soap for you, do you mean you have a set recipe, they make it, and then they ship it to you?
Exactly.
Yeah, contract manufacturing.
Yeah, white label kind of stuff. And so I went to them, and for reference, Bradford makes Tide.
Fuck.
All the Tide in the United States is made at Bradford Soap Works in Connecticut. They can do, I think they told me they can do 1 million tons of production a day.
That is scary.
They're massive.
You say, I need 5 minutes of your time.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I went to them and I said, I can't use one of your bases. I said, my customers would not accept that. They would want one of my bases. And they said, okay, well, we have a low minimum. I said, okay, what's your low minimum? And they said, well, 25,000 per fragrance.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, like, okay, so I sat down and I figured out what it would cost me to do 20. Say I went for Barrister's Reserve, right? I sat down and figured out what it would cost me to have 25,000 units of each manufactured. And I think the total calculation, including all the fragrance I would have to have made and everything, was like $800,000.
Yeah.
If I had 800 grand, I sure as hell wouldn't be doing
No,
this.
no chance.
Right.
Yeah.
I will tell you that right now. If I had $800,000 in cash, there would be no way in hell I would be making shaving soap for a
No.
living.
Yeah, exactly. And my husband is a real estate agent by trade, so like he's very into you got to spend money to make money, and he's always like you need to like sub that out, hire that out, and I'm like you don't understand. I've tried telling him this. I'm like you don't get it. It's not quite that easy.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that it's one thing in perfume where you could go to say a filler or somebody, and you can go to a compounding lab, and they're very precise. Like the perfumes for Berceuse are compounded outside because they have robotics and precise measurements, and they just have equipment that I don't have. I can't afford. So, and I don't want to put $100,000 into that kind of equipment when I can go to them and be like, hey guys, I need this done, and they're like, okay. Soap making is a much more specialized skill set in many respects. Like theoretically, any compounding lab, any cosmetics lab could do perfume compounding. And like that's a big statement to make because I can think of several cosmetics labs that'd be like, no, we don't do that. But in theory, they could adapt to that process. Yeah. Making soap is a very, very precise skill set. It's dangerous. It's high temperature. It's caustic. It's just there are very few companies who would be willing to do that on an extremely small scale. And the thing is, they're not going to do shaving soap. They'd rather do bar soap. Right. They can do, say, 50 pounds of bar soap, and they have it all curing in their racks, and then they're good to go. But it's not a complex process. It's like 4 or 5 ingredients, not 30.
Yeah.
So shaving soap is perhaps the most niche cosmetic there is.
It's definitely one of the least straightforward and one of the like process wise as far as temperament and like pourability and like the manufacturing side of it, production side. It's definitely one of the trickier things that I make, and I make a lot of variants of products as far as skincare goes. So it is definitely one of the more tricky ones. I mean, if you let it cool too much, you're going to be screwed by the time you get to the end of your batch trying to pour it and, things like that. So
exactly.
Yeah. So with your learning and with like breaking out into like the new fragrances and things like that, how have you like learned to adapt to like take the criticism? Like I've seen like in your AMAs, I've seen people make comments about like night music or something, things like that. And I know like as a maker, it's so hard to swallow bad feedback sometimes, and we have to be able to like take it and move on, but it's not always easy to take it and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do better. Sometimes it's like so crushing and soul-sucking, and you're just funny. Like, I spent hours
because
doing
if you're
that.
thinking of examples to where makers or artisans have reacted poorly, they pay for that sort of thing in this industry. It doesn't go well.
Yes.
You have to be able to, like, honestly,
and it's hard.
we get emails so regularly of, I received my brass razor, it has a patina on it already. Yeah, that's kind of what oxygen does, dude. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You can reverse it if you like, but we can't stop what oxygen does.
Don't do that.
You won't like criticism is definitely something that as makers or someone is part of a small business, you have to learn to accept, because if you don't, there are detrimental consequences to not dealing with it properly. Although you want to say, hey, fuck off, go away. You can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not easy to do.
No.
It's you know what, it's something. There are a couple of different ways to go about it. For years, it bugged me. It got under my skin. And like, I'm a lawyer. I'm used to jokes at my expense.
You're also used to carefully wording things,
Yeah.
right?
And so honestly, it got under my skin for a long time. And then I finally got to the point where I just didn't give a rat's ass anymore. And I mean, like, I don't mean that in the way that I don't care about people's criticism, because I do. You know, obviously I want to know whether they like it or they don't like it. But if it's things that are beyond my control, like, well, I don't like this fragrance. Okay.
How did you feel about the reserve base? Because I remember when that first released, the amount of people complaining on how to use it was widespread.
I still get that. I saw somebody on Reddit the other day saying that, you know, if you make a soap that requires a lot of water and takes, you know, adjustments to get right, well, then that's bullshit, and I'm not going to do that, and I'm gonna go with somebody else. It's like, that's fine. That's fine. Like, I think there's this belief that all of us need to be all things to all people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
That's
you.
absurd.
Thank you.
Well, like, we are not paid well enough to be all things to all people. I am not Procter and Gamble.
Oh, thanks for saying that, man. It's so true.
I am literally wearing a shirt that says I am not for everyone, because it is true. Like, no kidding. Like, seriously. Like, thank you, Will, so much for saying that out loud, because I feel like sometimes I'm the only maker that says that, and it's 100% true. There's no brand, whether you're an artisan, commercial brand, or anything else, that is the brand for everyone. Right. It doesn't happen. Period.
Right. And that's the thing. And like, you know, I have said in the past that I don't want or expect everyone to like everything we make, and I don't. And much of the reason for that is that, I mean, like, there are some people who really like nearly everything that I've released, and that's really cool. And there are people who hate everything we've ever released, and I won't say that's cool, but it's understandable.
Yeah.
Like, we don't see eye to eye, and that's fine. But to say that we should be held accountable for your personal preferences is ludicrous. I'm not a politician. Yeah. You know, for one thing, I'm not paid well enough. But because we're so closely tied to our clientele, right? And like, in many respects, I think niche communities like this, that the people who supply these hobbies are more accountable to their clientele than maybe anybody else. Because, like,
yeah,
okay, let's say that Procter and Gamble they launched a shampoo or something, and people
Well, they don't give a fuck, because they've got loads of these other revenue streams. When you make a soap, or Heather makes a soap, and it doesn't go down well, it's like, well, this is all I do, man. So I kind of need this to be good. And I wholeheartedly agree. When you're so tight, especially the scale of our community, when people don't like things, and a lot of people don't like things, that could put people off, man. Like, I've seen situations where I have taken someone's word for this sucks, and I've tried it myself, and it comes down to the fact that everyone's preference is different, and you try and, like, this is fantastic. What the hell were you talking about? It happens all the time.
Exactly.
So, moral of the story, if you hear bad things about something, ignore that person and try it for yourself, because you never know.
Yeah, and like, that's why samples exist, right?
Yeah.
So that you can see for yourself. Like, you know, I don't know what Carve's return policy is like. I know that for a while, I'm above the time they no longer do this because Stan is no longer at the head of the company, but for a while they had a 30-day, no questions asked, money back guarantee. If you had the thing, you shaved with it for 29 days, and you decided on the 29th day, you know what? This isn't for me. And you called Stan, and you were like, Stan, I don't like this. I want to send it back. Stan be like, okay, I'll send you a label.
I wouldn't say we do something like that specifically, but it's more to the case that if someone says this razor isn't for me, I've shaved with it a few times, because a lot of what this hobby is, especially getting used to the technique of shaving with a safety razor, I don't want someone to start it, have a poor shave, and then immediately blame the tool, because frankly, it's the person using the tool that's the tool in that aspect, more often than not. If it's the case that they try it for a few weeks and they say this process isn't for me, because I think it's more the process than it is the actual products you're using, yeah, then we'd honor a refund for the most part.
I mean, it's some things. Some people just don't get along with certain tools. Like I had a feather. What the heck was it? ASD1, I think, or whatever it was called. Their first stainless razor. The thing shaved like a damn butcher knife. I hated it. I eventually sold it to a man in Poland because I wanted it on the other side of the planet. Like, no, I sent it to a few people who were self-described feather aficionados, people who were like, I love feather razors. I love the blades. I love the stainless razors. I love everything. I sent it to a couple of these people, and they sent it back to me like, I don't know, man, this is a weird ass razor. I was not the first owner of the thing, and thankfully I'm not the last owner of it, but I had it for like 2 years, and every so often I would pull it out and be like, all right, I want to try and, see if I can get a handle on this thing. And no matter what I did, I bled like a stuck pig whenever I shaved with it. And I was like, I am getting rid of this thing. So I boiled it and bleached it because I was like, there's no way that anybody's ever going to get sick from this razor. So, I made sure that it was absolutely clean, and then I shipped it to this man in Poland who was like, hey, I really want one. I was like, good, it's yours. And I think I sold it to him for like $100.
Did he ever tell you how he felt about it? Out of interest?
Nope, never heard from him again. Maybe
unfortunate.
I certainly hope nothing happened to him, but it may well have been that the thing just like crawled out of his bathroom in the middle of the night and killed him. It was that kind of razor. So I've had a few of them over the years like that, and I've just like the original Mongoose, and like I have 2 Illumigis, and I love these razors. They're wonderful. Unfortunately, you can't get them anymore except on the secondary market. They're not in production at the moment. But I had one of the original Mongoose stainless razors, and I hated it. I just hated it. I think I eventually sold it to Chris Bailey, actually. Wow. But no matter what, it was just not for me. And I tried very hard, but
is that the singular with the massive head?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those things aren't for me. The real estate on the head is just too big.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So, in talking about taking criticism, I can't help but to bring up one recently with you.
Oh boy.
And
I know it's coming.
I think I may have mentioned this to you already. So, how about this Leviathan label? Like,
all right,
you've gotten a lot of heat from this.
I did, and on the one hand, I get it. Like, Leviathan has been a fixture of autumn releases for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. There are a lot of people who really like it. There are a few vocal people who really, really don't. And I understand, like, it's just considered sort of one of those classics of the modern wet shaving movement. Not to toot my own horn. Anybody, please don't send me hate now. But when we did the original label, it didn't have the Ouroboros on it, and it had like a little loop instead. And then the next year we changed it to that classic blue and white label. And when we first released that, people were mad.
I really like
like
that
I
label.
got pissed off. I got pissed off emails. People were like, well, this is not the appropriate usage for the Ouroboros. And I was like, I will call the symbol police. So, but over the time it was accepted, and I was like, and people were like, well, this is a classic. And I felt that it just needed a bit of a refresh. And so Michael Furr had sent me an email, and he was like, hey, I really like your product. I've been painting for a while. I find it very cathartic. I'd love to paint a soap lid for you. And I was like, all right, well, that's really cool. I really appreciate that offer. And so he said, he sent me his DeviantArt, and he was like, here, this is what my artwork looks like. And so I looked it up, and I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like, Michael's art is very vividly colored, just like and Mike, if you're watching this, please don't take this the wrong way, but it's like an acid trip in paint. It's wild. And so I was like, okay, I would love to turn this into a label because nobody's going to see it coming. And my mother, who, for those who don't know, co-owns the company with me, was like, well, what soap would you even have him paint? And I was like, what about Leviathan? Because I just felt that it needed something new. And so Michael sent me the painting, and he explained all the symbolism, because there's a whole lot of symbolism that went into the whole thing. And I've actually written it publicly a few places explaining what everything on the label actually means. But the overall effect was that people thought that it looked like something out of Pitch Black, or, like it was some weird sci-fi thing. And the colors, they felt the colors were all wrong and the whole thing. And I was like, okay, you guys got to calm down. It's a soap label.
People were passionate about it.
They were really upset. And to quote Douglas Smythe, I make soap, not soap opera. So, but we were already too far into it at that point. The labels had been printed. A lot of the soap had already been shipped. And I was like, all right, well, maybe this will blow over. And then people continued to say, you know what, we really hate this label. And I was like, okay, I get it. Message received. We will do something different next year. And I would not have believed that a label could inspire such hatred in people.
Yeah.
But actually, I really should have, because when we did Fougère Gothique, I got a lot of hate.
I loved. That's
Really?
my favorite label of yours.
Those
Thank
labels
you.
are pretty cool, I think.
That was done by Rebecca Graves Prowse, who did it. I think she did it in using some form of woodcut. I don't exactly know how she put that together. But anyway, I got angry emails from people of faith who felt that I was blaspheming and that it was wrong for me to put the likeness of the Prince of Darkness on shaving
Chill,
soap.
man.
And they felt the need to express their displeasure loudly. And I had a few people say, well, they've gone out of their way to offend my faith. And I was like, well, I haven't gone out of my way to offend anybody. I mean,
It's a soap label, dude. Calm down.
I don't really care what you do on Sundays. I don't care if you want to get together and beat each other with sticks. That's actually very Christian of you. So nobody. So, I'm only referring to the history of the church. All right.
Okay.
But in all seriousness, though, there were some people who were really upset, and I understand that. And it was one of those things where it's like, you know what, the devil is part of pop culture at this point. But the Leviathan label, I understand people are not into it, and so as silly as I think the controversy is, this is one of those things where I say, I do care about people's criticism because they're obviously upset, and I have accidentally hit them in a place that stings, and I don't want to do that. So we will change the label next year, and I don't want people to be upset with the packaging on their shaving soap.
So people complained about one label, and you were like, hold my beer, I can do better.
Heather, I have been doing this for long enough that I have a list of those.
Okay.
I have a book of those.
Let's move on then. So let's move on to your next venture. So more recently, you've decided to start what would be the correct term? A perfuming business? Would you call it that?
Luxury.
Okay. And I have a couple of questions based around that, really, because as far as I'm aware, in this wet shaving space, Barrister and Mann has always been considered a brand that can release pretty niche scents. Some people love them, some people don't. We've just discussed that. Why did you feel the need to release this new brand, although you have Barrister and Mann? What can this new brand offer that Barrister and Mann cannot?
This is there are sort of two answers to this question, and they're both right. On the one hand, shaving is a very small market.
Yep.
And shaving soap is a limited medium at best for producing fragrance. The evaporative profile doesn't really work properly. You lose a lot of the subtlety in what you do. It changes very heavily between something straight out of the jar versus once you add water. It's often different between the soap and the aftershave and the EDT. There are variations, and despite people's insistence that we should use expensive fragrance materials, that's really a colossal waste. Like, I've seen people say, well, you should do it with real jasmine absolute. It's like, you're out of your
A big
mind.
problem with that as well.
They're not going to want to pay
No,
for
and
that.
that's what I was about to say. Like, based on, like, let's say if you do put a lot of this money and a lot of development into making like a really strong, powerful fragrance or an expensive fragrance for soap, with all due respect to the wet shaving community, they aren't willing to pay what that costs.
No.
So,
And I mean, like, there are sort of one-offs. Like, Australian Private Reserve did a sandalwood fragrance, and they charged bank for it. But I think Dan only made like 50 jars or something.
Right.
And it was a very special thing, and it was sort of a one-off occurrence. Wet shaving is littered with sort of oddities like that. Like the Holy Black did Jekyll and Hyde, and that was a big thing. And they really ramped it up, and they did really well with it, and the branding was really cool. I don't actually know what it smelled like. I never smelled it, but you're right that there's a price ceiling in the shaving world that's subject to what I call the just soap problem.
yeah.
There's a certain price point that you reach where people go, well, I'm not paying that. It's just soap. And that single phrase is one of the underpinnings of the entire industry. It's just soap. People do not take shaving soap in the same stride and in the same light as they do fine fragrance. It's a matter of perception. It's a matter of perceived value, of marketing. It's a matter of artistic value. People who care about such things value fragrance as in a bottle more highly than they value shaving soap, even if the fragrance is exactly the same. Like,
there's, like you said, there's a degree of deterioration that happens, or a degree of this cannot depict exactly how I want it to be because it's a soap, right? And I think there's a big degree of, like you said, if you decided to go with that and you decided to put that value on what that would be, I think in most cases, even a lot of artisans now, if they're deciding to make more complex scents, they're probably not charging what they need to anyway. So they are making a loss on each tub of soap. Remember that.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know if I'd say they're taking a loss, but at least they're not. Yeah, they're not charging what it's worth, because they can't charge what it's worth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've had conversations with a few of the guys that No Blotter is an example I can give you. And he's told me the amount of work he puts into a soap versus how much he sells it for. Like Orbit, for example. Orbit should have been way more money.
$40 a jar.
It should have been
Easily.
priced higher. I've already had this discussion with Cody, and I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And exactly. I mean, like, Fougère Gothique, I spent months working on Fougère Gothique. I spent months working on Fougère Angelique. I spent months working on Night Music. These things were all finished fragrances. I mean, they're very complex. Le Grand Chypre, another one. They're La Vanille. Well, La Vanille is actually sort of an unusual case, but they are, in almost all respects, fine fragrance, but they can't be sold that way because of the format with which they were introduced. So there's that. There's also the fact that the wet shaving market is slowing down dramatically. And this is something that I saw coming 5 or 6 years ago.
What do you mean by slowing down?
This may not be true of razors.
It might be.
And the reason this may not be true of razors, or at least it might be true to a lesser degree, is that razor making is a much more unusual skill set at this point, even than soap making, because the thing is, when I first started making shaving soap, the methods for making shaving soap were closely guarded to the point of almost paranoia. It took me a long time to get that information before I could even start work. Now, this information is everywhere. The internet basically eliminated that barrier to competition. And so now anybody with, say, 50 or $100 in lipids and a crock pot and some fragrance oils can start making shaving soap, no questions
Yeah.
asked. And so the thing is that you have this massive glut of supply versus a limited and somewhat strained consumer base. And the thing is that the consumer base, the overall community, is not growing all that
No.
quickly. Like, there was this belief for some years that it was, growing at tremendous rates and we were going to take on Gillette and all of these things. And that was never going to happen, because at the end of the day, there is a real skill barrier to what we do. I have seen it in people's eyes when I have been at trade shows. If you tell them that they have to learn a new skill and they have to buy something from you in order to see that it's good, they immediately switch off.
We said exactly the same thing with our last episode with Michael Friedberg. It's to make
Yep.
this widely accessible, we need to make it as mindless as possible. And unfortunately, the way things are made in this industry, mindless doesn't work, because
Yep.
the amount of effort you or Heather put into making the soap or to making the scents, neither of those are mindless. It's
Yep.
difficult.
Yep.
It is really difficult.
And so,
Yeah.
everybody likes to shit on Gillette and cartridge razors and say, well, this is not very good, and it's, they go after it for being mindless, but in many respects, that was Gillette's greatest innovation. Was the fact that they took something that was very unpleasant and made it, they didn't necessarily make it less pleasant, but they made it easy enough and foolproof enough that you didn't really have to concentrate on it very much. It was just one more thing that you had to do in your morning, like making coffee. And so that, in many respects, from a product development standpoint, that was a stroke of genius. And I believe very strongly that Gillette, in many respects, is one of the greatest product development firms ever to exist. They transformed the market in a way that, I mean, like, they were disruptive. What they did was classic blue ocean strategy. They did what Uber has done. They did what Amazon did. They did what Facebook did, except the difference is that Uber has never turned a profit. And Gillette even then was making an immense amounts of money. And the thing was that they did it even before the advent of cartridge razors, when King Gillette first went to the Department of Defense at the beginning of the First World War and convinced them, because you couldn't have a beer because of mustard gas. You needed a clean seal. It was genius. He was brilliant. Brilliant. And so Gillette has, since they've been purchased by Procter and Gamble, I think they've grown less forward thinking.
I agree.
But for many decades, they were extremely forward thinking, and they saw, I mean, like, everyone's like, well, the only reason they did it was that their patents were expiring. And I don't think that's what it was. I think they foresaw a major cultural shift, and they beat it by about 10 years, and they timed it just right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I have the argument, though, that I feel like, if you look at the numbers, men's grooming and men's products in general, whether it's skincare, and actually even men's makeup is becoming a thing, especially like in Europe. And it's not quite here yet, but the trend will eventually get here. It's, we'll be a good 10 years behind probably. But these overall worldwide, these numbers are growing and growing, and have for the past couple of years, and are projected to grow. So I think that, like, this came up with Michael, when they say the market is saturated, well, the hobbyist market might be saturated, but there's a whole world of people who shave.
Yeah.
It's making it accessible to people. It's making people aware that this is still out there. This is still something that people do, and not everybody has to make it a hobby. You can make it a daily,
I think there aren't
care.
enough products that achieve the crossover well enough. What I basically mean, I alluded to it before. There's nothing mindless enough to use for the average user to just pick up and do it. And ultimately, that coupled with availability are the two things we're struggling with at the moment. And hopefully that.
And scalability.
Oh, big time.
Cost.
Yeah. I mean, if I said to you, Will, make a load of soap and send it to Target, can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
There's no chance.
No.
That's crazy.
No way.
Like, and
It depended on the timeline.
yeah.
Yeah, and like when we did Fougère Angelique and Fougère Gothique for Magritte, I mean, like that was a lot of
Yeah.
soap, and that basically derailed the entirety of production for like 3 weeks.
We found the same thing. Like when we need to do mass scale raises for someone, it's okay. Our retail's going to suffer for this because we can't commit to this.
Yep.
So that needs to be bad. People need to bear that in mind. I'm going to move on here,
Yep.
and I'm going to pose both of you the same question, and I want you to both answer it. What if I told you guys, and how would you respond, if I said you need to make smaller tubs, more complex fragrances, and charge less money for them? How would you achieve that, and could you achieve that?
The least difficult part of that is the smaller tubs.
Yeah.
For my own part, I could probably handle the cost reduction. And that's only because of advancements that I'm in the process of making for the market as a whole. I think that's not a feasible request. And I think the idea of more complex fragrances is there's a huge skill set that's required in order to make fragrance that doesn't suck. And like, I guess it's in the eye of the beholder what does or doesn't suck. But there's that format limitation, that medium limitation, whereby, yeah, okay, I could make a fragrance that's got 85 notes like Bogue Mem does, but you'd lose 70% of them as soon as you poured it into soap. For one thing, it would boil off. Like, we do soap at 180 degrees. It's gone. You're just going to lose a lot of those most volatile top notes, and you're going to lose a lot of the subtlety. So the thing about more complex fragrances, is there really any point? I mean, like, I could go through, because I have a relatively large collection of vintage fragrance formularies. And a lot of what I know about classic fragrance structure comes from those. And some of them even have, soap fragrances in them and that sort of thing. But that's asking, once again, that's something where you're asking a lot of people who are not being paid enough to do that work.
Absolutely. And I think kind of if you think of a smaller tub, what you're really doing is you're doing the same amount of work and kind of just pouring a smaller tub, right? There isn't.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There isn't really a big trade-off there for the artisan involved. I'd also argue that for the people requesting that, in an ideal world, yeah, for the consumer, I think that's a fantastic situation. Less soap, smaller amount of money, more complex fragrance. But I think the logistics of that on the artisan side, these people don't make much money as it is. Especially the margins on soap, I know for sure are much smaller than the margins on razors. It would be a stretch. What do you think, Heather?
Yeah. I have very strong opinions about this, and thank you, DK, thank you, DK, for bringing this up yet again. So I am a no sample person. I am a no smaller tubs person, and it is exactly because we put in the same amount of work for half the product. But the packaging still is really not that much of a difference just because it's smaller packaging. Really, it's not that much of a difference on savings. The labels really aren't that much of a difference. And so a lot of our if you take our labor and like our time out of it and just look at cost expense to make it, you're not really saving any money as far as that goes. And then we're labeling twice as much product to get,
anyone that's labeled,
it's not like you could sell it. Yeah, labeling sucks.
It's awful.
Donkey balls. It sucks. Like, it is like...
It's awful.
The most time-consuming thing, and it takes longer than making the soap, almost. I mean, it's just ridiculous, and you can't expect to get half the product for half the price. and that's what people are going to want. And it just doesn't work that way. It is not efficient for us. It is not space efficient for us. And let's be real, we don't have warehouses.
It's so
Like,
true.
No.
Yeah.
you know, my shop, my like temp controlled workspace is 14 by 18. I got a lot of shit in that little space. I mean, I have other stuff outside of that that's not temp controlled, but my temp controlled area is very small, and it's very efficiently stacked right now. And it just is not efficient. I realize from the consumer part of it, they, especially when they have 50 plus, 50, 100 soaps, obviously 2 or 3 ounce pucks or jars is much better for them because they're never going to use what they have. But one of the reasons I sell 5 ounce tubs versus a 4 ounce tub is because it doesn't really cost me that much more to do a 5 ounce than it does a 4 ounce. And you still have plenty of headroom and loading room and
It's
things
also a
like that.
way to add value to your product, right? So if you're looking at competition, if a utilitarian looks at your soap and they say, well, they're the same price and one's giving me more, the toss up there is they perceive your soap as higher value, right? I don't think it applies to the hobbyists because frankly, if I added all the ounces of soap together, I'd probably be in 3 figures, easily 3 figures. So I mean, I get what you're saying. So are you both categorically saying, one, there isn't any point, and two, there's no financial incentive for the artisan?
There's zero financial incentive for the artisan, I feel.
Yeah, and like I said, I was talking about the human element earlier, and the fact that a lot of this is done by hand, and as Heather said, no matter what, it's still the same amount of work.
It is.
So to make up for it, we'd have to charge more per ounce, and this is one of those things where we are not making a value product. And people are like, well, sterling is inexpensive, and that's very true. But at the end of the day, let's really think about this. Like, if you go and you buy a bar of Yardley soap and it's, I don't know, what are they, 5.6 ounces, and it's $1, right? That's what is it, 20 cents an ounce, 18 cents an ounce? Or if you go to sterling and it's $2 an ounce, and we look at that as inexpensive, but that's because our frame of reference is way out here. So it's a matter of framing, and if you want really, really complex fragrances, then you're going to have to be willing to pay for them because we are not multinational corporations. That's not how this works. I know that there are people who think that Barrister and Mann is like some multinational conglomerate and that I'm worth millions and that, I'm just a greedy asshole. But at the end of the day, this is really hard. It doesn't pay very well, and I work 100-hour weeks most weeks.
That's fucking bananas. That's a lot of hours.
Yeah.
And I've done that for almost 7 years now. I'm getting tired.
Need a vacation.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I try to explain as well. And this is why I'm comfortable at this point saying I'm not for everybody, is because I'm not going to work my 15, 16, 18-hour days for $8 an hour.
No way.
Yeah. Nobody is you're not going to do it. The customer's they're not willing to stay at their job and work those, double shifts essentially for $8 an hour. So they shouldn't really expect us to, not to mention all the R&D and things that we pay for to get to improvement and to, things like that to improve our product and stuff. You expect to be paid for the time you put in. There's no reason why you should expect us to not be paid for the time we put in, because we put in a lot of friggin' hours. Yep. It's just how it is. Yeah. So, thank you. I'm glad you're on that. But you do sell samples. And speaking of which, I have an awesome one here. Yeah. And this little box that it comes in is the cutest thing ever. The packaging on this was amazing for samples, by the way.
Wait. I got to show you something, because except for the few people who have bought them, no one has seen this. This is the box for the full bottle right here.
I love the eyelashes. That's just
so actually, if I break the seal, because there's nothing in this one, it's just an empty box. But if I break the seal and take off the sleeve, it opens up, and then it's got like the little hello, and the bottle would be right here. But everything's sort of held together that way. So we put a lot of work into the unboxing experience for this, and that's part of the reason it took so damn long.
Yeah, definitely. It's very good.
Thank you.
I actually think we've covered everything today. Before we do say goodbye to everyone, do either of you have any plugs?
Go check out BerceuseParfums.com.
Is Barrister and Mann doing anything? Is any new releases on the horizon?
We have something coming. We did Behold the What's last year for Dr. Seuss's, ostensibly for Dr. Seuss's birthday, but we actually kind of missed the date. And that was due to a number of reasons, not the least of which was a packaging shortage. I couldn't get the jars that I wanted, and so we ended up going with the green jars. And I was like, well, if this is going to work for anything, it'll work for Dr. Seuss. And weirdly, people accused us of not actually putting 4 ounces of soap in it. They're like, there's no way that these have 4 ounces of soap in them. And it's like, weigh them.
Yeah.
I promise you I did not short the jars. Everything is 4 ounces, I swear. But so that worked well, and we donated a bunch of money to the Children's Literacy Initiative, and that was super cool. So this time around, we want to do something for children's television.
Wow.
Mr. Rogers, Captain Kangaroo, Sesame Street, that kind of thing. And so there's something coming in the next few weeks in that vein.
Okay, fantastic.
Oh, so, nice.
Anything on the Zingari side, Heather?
Yes, so we will be launching, probably around the time this is out, maybe just before this comes out. I'm going to be launching my Black Label line, and that is going to be a little bit different. It is going to be all original fragrances and scents, not made by me, but they are made. But they are made by other artists and perfumers, and I'm kind of bringing that in. I don't have any of the labels. Actually, will be here like tomorrow, I think. So I don't have an official label, but they're going to be in these really cool, like super heavy Italian glass jars. With soap in these jars are 17 ounces. They're pretty badass. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm going to carry the first EDPs that I've made. So I'm really excited, and hopefully people like it. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, awesome. On the carve side, we are going to Big Shave Southwest and Magod Meetup. Big Shave Southwest, we have a collaboration coming in with Tallow and Still. It's called Coffee in the Canadian Wilderness. It's kind of like a nature-y scent with really strong notes of coffee. Ryan, as per usual, has designed a really cool scent for that. So if you're at that show, watch out for our stand and you should see that soap. But yeah, aside from that, I really appreciate you coming on today, Will. We've had a good chat, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Will. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Catch you all next time, guys.